Good morning, everyone, and it's very good to talk on this subject. I want to go back and just go over some basic provisions, as it were. Firstly, the general rules of umbrella funds set out provisions applicable to all employers participating in the fund. We know that. The special rules, their purpose is either to add content required by the general rules, such as what the actual rate of contribution will be for an employer, what the retirement age is, whether there are going to be any insured risk benefits, and so on, and what those are. The other thing that special rules do is they may add, they may supplement the general rules, and they may even amend the general rules. But they are rules as required to be registered, which is why, as you know, special rules are always submitted for registration. And when they are registered, they form part of the rules of that fund as required in terms of Section 12 of the Act. So it's common to have provision in the rules of all funds, and these are in the general rules particularly, that contributions for an individual member may be suspended or reduced in certain circumstances, such as where when a member is on extended maternity leave, when they're on unpaid leave, and so on. And in that regard, there are usually provisions also which set out how fund costs are to be paid in respect of that member. Often it's the employer that must pay it, or it's to be debited from the member's fund credit. Whether or not premiums for insured risk benefits are to be paid, and so on. So these are not usually ever in the special rules because they're already in the general rules. And it's important to note these individual arrangements that exist already in the general rules. And what we're dealing here with is really an extension of those provisions applicable to an employer generally. And the issue is how to achieve that. And it shows you that why rules are always in a constant state of evolution, because this COVID pandemic and its consequence for pension funds is a good example of why we are always having to evolve rules to cater for new and different circumstances. And so too in the case of employers, where they have to, for financial reasons, and by agreement with employees, reduce their contributions. So there are two ways of reducing contributions. You can either reduce the fund salary, and the provisions in that regard are typically found in all umbrella fund general rules, that the employer simply by notice to the fund says that a member's fund salary has been reduced. Or it's a provision that does not refer to fund salary, but simply says that the rate of contribution reduces, say from 12% to 2% or something like that. If contributions are to be suspended altogether, you need to have a special provision for that. So once the provisions are in the general rules, my view is that there's no point in them being replicated in the special rules. And the reason for that is you don't have every provision of the general rules replicated in the special rules. That would simply defeat the object of having special rules and general rules. As I said before, the point of the special rules is either to add content to the general rules, or in some way to supplement the or amend the general rules. But if you have the enabling provision for the suspension of an employer's contribution, and this can apply to either the reduction of fund salary or the reduction itself of the rate of contribution, and you have appropriate provisions for that in the general rules, there's simply no need to have them in the special rules. There's certainly no legal requirement to replicate that in the special rules. I understand that the FSCA wants there to be special rules
Jonathan, sorry to interrupt you. Can you go back about 30 seconds and just repeat what you said, because you broke up there?
Oh, okay, sorry. Well, let me go back a bit further. I said there were two ways of reducing contributions. One is by reducing the fund salary, and that requires, if there is a provision for it in the rules, the employer simply to tell the fund that the member's fund salary has, say, reduced from 20,000 rands per month to 1,000 rands a month. The other way is for the rate of contribution to be reduced, which would require some notification and then in the rules for that to happen. And then for an actual suspension of the contributions, you would need a separate provision for that entirely. So my point is this: once they have these enabling provisions for an employer in the general rules, there's no need for them to be replicated again in the special rules, because they are there as an enabling provision in the general rules. To replicate them in the special rules actually achieves nothing, and it's certainly not a requirement in law that it needs to be replicated. And just to note also that if you reduce the fund salary, you need to take care that that doesn't have an impact on reducing the insured risk benefits. And some umbrella fund rules have a specific provision about what the risk salary is and what the actual fund salary is for purposes of contributions. So my understanding is that the FSCA wants the special rules per employer in addition to the general rules, so that the FSCA can monitor how many employers are making use of the suspension or reduction provision. And it's unfortunate that this thing about the special rules has been used as a form of compliance supervision, because firstly, it's duplicating work, it's creating costs for funds, and it's slowing down at the FSCA the approval of the general rules which are required for this. Secondly, an employer which seeks only a reduction of contributions could probably still achieve that by giving notice of a reduction of fund salary. So the FSCA might not even know about it if the employer chose that route. Then in type B umbrella funds, those are the umbrella funds, as you know, where there are no special rules required. If this general rule exists, the FSCA wouldn't know which employers were making use of it or not. And there's no reason to really distinguish between type A and type B umbrella funds in this issue. And then finally, there are ways for the FSCA to find out how many employers are making use of this by, for example, asking the funds to report to it in that regard. It does have the power to require those reports, or to check up on funds when they undergo their compliance checks periodically, or to include it in some way in the annual financial statements. So my conclusion is this: that as a matter of law, there is no requirement to replicate the suspension or reduction provisions in special rules if the general rules adequately provide for that at an employer level. I checked again, there's no directive or so any form of subordinate legislation where the FSCA is able to lawfully demand that umbrella funds submit special rules, as well as having a general enabling rule for this. So whilst I'm certainly not wanting to invite our listeners to pick a fight with the FSCA, the most important point is that the general rules make provision for it. If funds do want to go ahead and have special rules put in place as well, then of course, by all means. But the problem with special rules specifically for this is that you would inevitably have to amend those further when hopefully this economic effect of this pandemic lifts and employers are able to go back to the position they were before. And I'm not terribly keen on employers submitting endless rule amendments because that's how mistakes can be made and errors slip in. And as long as the basic enabling provisions exist in the general rules, that is enough in law and should hopefully be enough for the trustees. Of course, you do need to take a lot of care that those general rules are properly enabling. So that's my contribution.